Welcome to my April reading wrap-up. April was a really great month of reading for me. I read 8 books, 5 of which were rom-coms, 1 being a historical fiction, which is a brand new genre to me, and 2 being thrillers. I always really like to mix up the genres that I'm reading, read genres that are completely new to me, and through doing that this month I feel like I found some of my favourite books of the year so far, so I'm really looking forward to chatting to you all about them. So let's get started. First book that I started reading in March but I finished in April was The Burnout by Sophie Kinsella. This book follows our main character Sasha, who, like the title suggests, is very burnt out at work. The moment the burnout catches up with her is actually one of my favourite parts of the book. It's written in a really funny tone. It obviously has a deeper message to it and a deeper experience for Sasha, but the way she describes it is with a lot of humour, and I really liked that section of the book. Following this real moment of burnout, she decides to take an extended leave from work, and in that time, very quickly, she goes on holiday, and she decides to go to a place where she went as a child and it has a lot of happy, lovely memories for her. While she's there, she meets Finn, who is essentially basically the only other person staying in this seaside town and staying in the hotel that she is in. And from this point, the book follows Sasha figuring out what she wants to do with her life, what the next steps that she wants to take are, and also it looks very much at her dynamic with Finn. So I would very much describe it as a rom-com. That's definitely the vibe and the tone of the book. One thing that I really enjoyed about the book, and I've kind of already mentioned it a little bit, is the humour, especially in the first half of the book. I feel like I annotated so many lines at the start of this book. I really want to go back through actually and read those, because I know that the ones that I annotated were purely because they really made me laugh. I think it's that kind of relatable, funny humour. I think Sasha has quite a dry sense of humour, and because of that it added a lot to her character throughout the book, and the humour at the start made me feel like I got to know Sasha really quickly. I also really enjoyed the pace of Sasha and Finn's relationship. I like that it took them some time to get close to each other, and the more time that they spent with each other, the more they realised that they had quite a lot in common, and that's what brought them closer together. And because of the pacing of it, I felt like their relationship felt really natural. I really liked the dynamic between the two of them. One thing that I really would have liked to see a little bit more in the book is more discussion about Sasha's past and a little bit of a deeper look into it. There's something in particular that I won't say because I don't want to spoil the book, but there's something in particular I think is quite central to her as a character and very much central to her experience throughout this book. And we definitely looked at it, but I think personally I would have really loved to have a bit of a deeper dive into that and into its impact, just a deeper look at the situation so that we got that deeper understanding of Sasha. So in terms of my rating for the first book of the month, I rated it 3.5 stars. It was a really easy, lovely, fun read. If you're looking for a rom-com with nostalgic vibes, a funny main character, I would recommend this one. It's one that I think if you're going for a weekend away or a holiday, it would be a good one to bring along with you for your trip. Next is a book that I read on my Kindle. It is Picking Daisies on Sundays by Liana Cincotti. This book follows our main character Danny, who is also known as Daisy, and the book opens 4 years back in time. Danny is admitting her feelings for her best friend Levi. He basically doesn't tell her that he feels the same way, and from that point we flash 4 years into the future to present day. From that point, 4 years ago, their friendship has become very distant. They basically haven't seen each other since that moment, and then, like all good rom-coms, they bump into each other for one reason or another. Danny finds herself agreeing to pretend to date Levi and go to his sister's wedding with him. I just loved the feel of this book and how throughout the whole experience of me reading it, I was just picturing it as a rom-com. Even just the description of the book, I can just see it as a rom-com. I really hope one day this book is adapted onto screen because I think it would make a really good film. And one of my favourite things about the book was the structure. Each chapter opened with a quote, which I really enjoyed because it kind of set the scene, sometimes for the chapter, but mainly for the dynamic between Levi and Danny. And it felt like you could unpick the meaning behind the quotes the more of the book that you read. Also, in terms of the structure, we were given clues along the way that when you got to a certain part of the book, book you realise their relevance and it all kind of came together. That sounds like a really cryptic way to describe it, but I just don't want to give any spoilers in this reading wrap up today. If you have read it, you'll know exactly what I mean, or at least I hope you do. And yeah, because of that, I really enjoyed the structure of the book. I said this in my spring reading video, but I also felt really complete when I finished reading this book. It felt like all the questions that I had or might have had throughout the book were answered, and everything was tied together really nicely. I felt like we got everything and more from this book. That also includes an epilogue, which I've said on my YouTube channel and on my TikTok before, but I absolutely love an epilogue. I always feel like an epilogue adds a different perspective or drops in a new piece of information that you weren't expecting, and I always feel like it's a really satisfying thing to read at the end of a book, particularly a book that you've really enjoyed, and that was definitely the case for this one. I just love an epilogue, and I really loved the epilogue in this book. Also, another thing to say about this book is that if you're a Taylor Swift fan like myself, I feel like you'll really enjoy this book, because along the way there are a few references to Taylor Swift or to her songs that were just really fun aspects along the way. So I gave this book 4.5 stars. I do think it is the perfect time of year now to read this book. It very much has spring rom-com vibes, and so it's just perfect for this time of year. Next are a couple of thrillers, and the first one, No One Saw a Thing by Andrea Mara. Our main character, Sive, is rushing to catch a tube in London with her 2 kids. She's over in London from Dublin for her husband's friend's reunion. As she's trying to get on the tube, one way or another, her children make it on the tube and she doesn't. And when she eventually finds out where they are, when she turns up, only her youngest daughter, who's, I believe she was about 2 years old, is there. She asks around, no one knows what happens, no one, given the title of the book, saw anything. Her youngest daughter can't really communicate too much of what she saw and what happened, and it's from that point that we follow the story in understanding basically what happened. We flick between 2 timelines in this book. We went from 3 days before modern day, where we looked at her husband's friend's reunion, and then we looked at modern day, which went kind of minute by minute, hour by hour of Sive trying to find her daughter. And I always love when thrillers flick between perspectives in that way, and it worked really well in this book in particular, because past timeline 3 days before provided really great context and understanding for essentially the backdrop of the dynamics that we were experiencing and learning about in modern day. And then in modern day, I felt like that timeline had the sense of urgency and sometimes obviously the sense of panic that I think makes a really gripping thriller. I also enjoyed how the last couple of chapters included quite a few more reveals than I expected. There'd be a really big twist or a really big turn in the book, and then you'd think that was it, and suddenly another thing would happen. It makes it a real page turner, and I just love when you don't see a twist and a turn coming in a book like this. In terms of the rating for this book, I'm pretty sure I explained this in my thriller read video, but if it weren't for me having read The Couple at Number 9 by Claire Douglas, which is just one of my all-time favourite not only thrillers but books, I just really enjoyed reading that one, then I would have probably given this book 5 stars, but I just have to compare it to the other thrillers that I've read and to The Couple at Number 9, and The Couple at Number 9 was just my absolute favourite, so I decided to give this one 4.5 stars. But take that as you will, it essentially would have been a 5-star book if it hadn't been for having read The Couple at Number 9. So I very much enjoyed it, and both of those books were 2 of my favourite thrillers that I've read. Next on the list was The Wrong Sister by Claire Douglas, which is a book that I was really looking forward to picking up this month because, as I've just said, I'm a really big fan of Claire Douglas. I've read 2 other of her books before I read The Wrong Sister, and both of them I really enjoyed, so I was really looking forward to picking up this one. This book follows Alice and Tasha. Tasha goes on holiday with her husband and she leaves her children in the safe hands of her sister Alice, but a couple of days into her trip she gets a call that Alice and Kyle have both been attacked at her home. The children are okay, but Alice is in hospital and Kyle has been killed. So it's a very gripping opening to this book. You know that the story isn't going to be straightforward because it never is with Claire Douglas's book. So I felt like this was a really good starting point, and I was really looking forward to reading all of the twists and turns that were inevitable in this book. What I would say about this one is that it did feel a little bit slower paced than I'm used to with Claire Douglas. It was much more of a slow build towards the twists and turns, and it felt like those twists and turns very much happened towards the end of the book as opposed to them being kind of dropped in along the way of the whole book. If you like that more slow build thriller, I think you would really enjoy this because it still has the Claire Douglas writing I know and love, and the twists are still written very well. I think for me personally, I prefer those more fast-paced books from Claire Douglas and from thrillers in general. I really like when it's twisty, turny, really gripping and fast-paced throughout, right from chapter 1. So I gave this book 3 stars. Like I say, I really enjoyed it. It definitely has the Claire Douglas writing that I really love, particularly in the kind of first and last sections. But as I say, it was just a little bit more slow-paced than I would prefer personally with a thriller. Next is another Kindle read. It is Ready or Not by Cara Bastone. This book follows Eve, who unexpectedly gets pregnant. The book follows her through every trimester of her pregnancy. It looks at her friendships, her plans for her future, and how those have maybe changed now that she's pregnant. It obviously looks at the pregnancy itself, and it looks at her relationships as well. It's very much a romance book alongside it being about her pregnancy. And I really found this such a lovely read. In particular, I really liked how Cara Bastone discussed pregnancy and motherhood throughout this book. I've never really read a book that focuses on pregnancy before, but it gave a really insightful and honest look at our character's experience of pregnancy. I felt like it gave me a new appreciation of pregnancy, a new understanding and perspective of pregnancy, and I just found it, because of that, a really insightful read, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I'm not sure why, but I wasn't necessarily expecting it going into it, so I really liked that aspect of it. I also really enjoyed the personality of the main love interest throughout this book and their dynamics with Eve. I thought that he was very caring, very kind, very considered, and he obviously very deeply cared about Eve. I also really enjoyed that it wasn't necessarily the obvious person who was the love interest in this book. It would have been very easy to write the book in a certain way with a certain love interest because of what the story is based on, but I liked that it was the person that we didn't necessarily expect throughout the book, because also that added a whole other dynamic into the book, which kind of made it a very realistic look on the situation. Also, emotions were very well written in this book, particularly because we're obviously seeing the book from Eve's perspective. It not only looked at her pregnancy, like I said, with such honesty, but everything that she was experiencing. I just felt like the emotions were written in a way that was really relatable, even if you hadn't been in that situation before. Just gave a real insight and deep understanding into Eve. So I really like how emotions and relationships were written throughout the book. A really lovely writing style. I gave this book 4 stars, and it's another one that I would really recommend for a spring read. I feel like I'm recommending a lot of spring reads, but with it having just been April, that's definitely what I've been reading. Next up was a book that I was really looking forward to reading this month. It's the second book in the Rosehill series, Wild Eyes by Elsie Silver. Because the third book in the series, Wild Side, was released, and having read the first book, I thought it was the perfect time to pick up the second, and I feel like seeing people reading it online was really inspiring me to get back into this series. The first book in the series, which is on my shelf here, Wild Love, is one that I really enjoyed, and I was really interested in a side character in that book, West. He was really central to the story of the first book. I kind of wish that we'd learn more from him or heard more from him in the first book, because I just really liked his character. And so I was very pleased when I found out that Wild Eyes focuses on West and his main love interest in the book, Skylar. The book's written from both of their perspectives, and it follows famous country singer Skylar, who, after having received some really bad press following a breakup, she really wants to get away from the limelight for a little bit. So she makes her way to Rosehill. She's going there to see our 2 characters from the first book, Rosie and Ford, who both run the record label there. Her plan is basically to go have a break from the spotlight and write a new album. When she gets there, on her first day of arriving, she meets West, who is Rosie's brother from the first book, and one way or another Skylar ends up staying with West, or basically in his bunkhouse, which is a part of his property. And their relationship was a really good one to read, because even though they instantly were clearly more than friends, it wasn't kind of a friends first situation. Their dynamic didn't feel rushed or unnatural. It felt very natural that they instantly had this connection, and because of that it just made it a really fun, lovely romance to read. Also, one thing that this book describes our two main characters as is that they've both come from very different worlds, and I don't think that was meant just in terms of fame. It was referring to their experiences and their upbringing. So West had a very loving, supportive family, and Skylar had a very different experience. I think that added a lot to their dynamic, because it was the first time that Skylar, through West, was experiencing this genuine kindness, genuine support, and just really genuine love with no ulterior motive. And so I felt like that was a really nice part of their relationship. It also obviously had sadness because it was Skylar's first time experiencing that, but ultimately it was a really nice part of their relationship, and I liked that that was discussed in the book because it felt like it gave real depth to their relationship and to their characters. Also in this book, West has 2 children, and I felt like the addition of them as characters added so much to the book. I really enjoyed Skylar's relationship with them. From West's perspective, I really enjoyed seeing him witness that and how that brought West and Skylar closer together. I do feel like the plot slowed a little bit in the middle section of this book, and I think because of that it maybe felt a little bit repetitive at times from chapter to chapter. Plot wasn't necessarily moving forward, and we were honing in on their dynamic and their relationship. So while it was really good to see that, I think maybe it made the pace feel a little bit slower in the middle there, because rather than looking at that alongside the plot moving forward, we were purely looking at that. I would say though that the pace definitely picked up again towards the end, and I really enjoyed the plot points of the last couple of chapters and how it really showed Skylar's character development throughout the book, and essentially the impact that West and her experiences in Rose Hill had had on her. I gave the first book in this series 4 stars, and I decided to rate this book this month 3.5 stars. I'd really love to know your thoughts on this series and this book, and if you've read the third one, do let me know, because I'd definitely like to pick that up this month. Next is another Kindle read. It is Emily Henry's latest release, Great Big Beautiful Life. Now I've done a whole video where I purely read and review this book, so I won't linger too much on my review in this video because I don't want to repeat myself. If you've seen that video, I'll leave that one linked down below, but I will give an overview of my thoughts on this book because I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favourite books of this month. I mentioned in that video, but I have never read an Emily Henry book before picking this one up. They've been on my TBR for a little while now, but when I realised that this new book was being released in April, I decided to make this my first Emily Henry read, and I'm really glad I did because it was just one that I really loved. So the book follows Alice and Hayden, who are competing to write the biography of famous celebrity Margaret Ives, who the book describes as being famously reclusive, and she essentially hasn't been spotted out in public in many years. So both of the authors are really keen to write this book, and the book flicks between 2 timelines. We're looking at Alice's perspective of the competition to write the biography and the interview process, and also her relationship with Hayden. And then we're flicking to Margaret. We're flicking in the past to kind of the 50s and the 60s, and we're looking at her life story. So this book explores loads of themes. It's got family dynamics, romance, career, just so many things are discussed in this book, and I really liked that. It felt like it was really full and packed with good plot, which I really enjoyed. I also loved how it flicked between present day and the past. I felt like that worked really nicely. I really liked how different the past and present timelines were from one another, and I think that's why so many themes could be discussed in the book, because we were looking at 2 storylines storylines essentially. Character development and the unpicking of our characters was also great. It gave such a deep understanding of each character throughout the book. I even felt like if it was more of a side character in the book, I still got a deep understanding of who they were and an understanding of why they made certain decisions. I also said in my video that if you've read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I really think you'd enjoy this book. It's got a very similar vibe, but it also has its differences as well. So if you enjoyed that book, I just think you'd really enjoy this one. So that's a very quick overview of my thoughts on this one. I have so much to say about it that I've said in my previous video, so like I said, I'll link that in the description. But I gave this book 5 stars. It was one of my favourite reads of, I don't think even just the month, I think of the year as well. Next is yet another Kindle read. I really enjoyed reading on my Kindle this month, and this one is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. There is a lot of depth to this story, so I feel like it's kind of a little bit difficult to give an overview of it, but I will do my best to try and give a brief overview. We follow 2 sisters in France at the time of World War II, particularly looking at the time that Germany invaded France, and we look at what they did to survive, what they had to do to survive, and how they helped those who were particularly in need at that time. It was such an insightful book. This is the first historical fiction that I've ever read. It came very highly recommended. Whenever I was looking up which historical fictions to start with, this was always on the list of people's favourites, and I can really see why. I felt like because it was clearly so well researched, I learnt so much about the time period. Obviously a lot of the storyline is fiction, but it is set around truth, and the events that are happening around them are obviously historical events. Just to get that look into that was really interesting, and I just thought it was so brilliantly written and clearly so brilliantly researched that I learnt things that I definitely didn't know about the time period, specifically about women's experience of the war in France that I just didn't know before reading this book. It's the kind of book that when I finished it, it made me go and research and watch things to learn even more, because I just realised what I didn't know through reading this book. And I think that's probably, obviously it's my first historical fiction, but I think that's probably a very good sign of a very good historical fiction, where it makes you go and learn even more after you finished reading. It was also obviously a very emotional read, and I think that it worked really well looking at 2 sisters. So one sister had a child and one sister was quite a bit younger and didn't, and I think that impacted their decision making. They also had quite different personalities. Their perspective on things, or not necessarily their perspective, but what they decided to do at the time was quite different to one another, and really showed how people who are in the same family could have had quite different experiences at the time. I feel like this has made me want to read a lot more historical fictions, and specifically more from Kristen Hanna, because I know she writes other historical fictions. It was just brilliant, and I am already recommending it to a lot of people. I've recommended it to my dad and my sister as well. I just feel like it's one that I would really recommend to everyone, really. I thought it was a brilliantly written, very insightful, like I said, very emotional read. And it won't be a surprise to you to know that I gave it 5 stars. So that is everything. That is all 8 books that I read this month. I've been very lucky with the books that I've picked up this month. I've read some really good ones. I've had a really varied reading month, which I always really enjoy. I would love to know what you've been reading this month. Do you have any top recommendations of books that you've really enjoyed reading? I am just about to pop to the shops actually. I'd like to go and pick up a couple of books for my May TBR, or just get inspired by the kind of things that I might like to read over the next month. But for now, that's everything that I have read in April. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit of a recap of the books that I've been loving. Yeah, do let me know what you've been reading. I will chat to you again next week with another reading video. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you then.